Welcome to 3 Count Commentaries. This is your boy MagMongoSlade. Let's talk about Dark Side of the Ring, John Tenta, the Earthquake. Not really dark. Not really dark at all. It was a biography of John Tenta, and not a particularly good one, if we're being honest. It was okay. His family was in it. They were very good. They added a lot of elements to his personality that we missed, but he just seemed like a big jolly guy, just like a guy, probably one of those Mick Foley kinds of guys who was too good for the business. It was a guy who was involved with a lot, but mostly the situations he were involved in and some of the people he were involved in was far more interesting than what he had done. For instance, that Koji Kitao guy, my goodness, what a knucklehead that guy turned out to be. So we're going to talk a little bit about him. And we're going to expand a little bit on some of the things that they touched on in Dark Side of the Ring. There's some minor things here and there from some extra readings I did. For instance, they talked about John Tenta being in Sumo. So they did an interview, Slam Wrestling posted an interview that was conducted in 1988 with John Tenta, where they broke down his sumo training schedule and why he quit sumo. So it says from 5 o'clock, 5:30, he did partner work. Basically, you practice. 6:30, exercise. 7:30, stable work, was just shuffling and rolling. 8 o'clock, arm exercises. 9:30, he rested and he watched the what they call higher division guys perform in sumo. Basically watched them practice. Then 10:30, he did leg exercises. At 11 o'clock, if you're a higher division guy, you took a bath, and the lower division guys were basically your servants. Basically, they had to wash your body and all that kind of stuff. And then after you bathed, they got to bathe. So he was usually a lower division guy. So he had to bathe other people and then bathe himself afterwards. He could only eat 2 meals a day, which was very frustrating for him. And believe it or not, they didn't mention this, and they almost never do, that he faced some prejudice as being a white guy in Japan. Said that there was a lot of hard feelings from the other sumo wrestlers, mostly to him getting special attention from his coaches, and that he had a girlfriend, which he was not supposed to have, apparently, due to his stature as a low rank. He wasn't supposed to have a girlfriend. He was under constant pressures to win and to stay undefeated, and he wasn't making enough money. So he quit. And that was pretty much it. But the big thing is that Japan had a real big issue with tattoos. And he has a tattoo, as most people know, on his upper, I want to say, right shoulder. The big tiger that he always had on his arm. And they wanted him to remove it with lasers so that he could, be more of a role model in Japan. And he was frightened by that because this is 1988 and they want you to go under a laser. Like, yes, in 2024, it doesn't sound that scary because people, laser things off. But in 1988, you don't know what the hell is about to happen to you. They might cut your whole arm off. You watch a James Bond movie or something like that, lasers are, basically knives. No way. So this is pretty much why he quit sumo. But it also was the reason why he got into it with this Koji Kitao guy. So they talked about this, what was this, 1991, the SWS WWF Super Show, Tenta versus Kitao. The first match, Koji Kitao put him over pretty clean, no problem. Then Koji Kitao, they don't mention this, he worked in WWF with Tenryu, and they worked WrestleMania 7. And they beat Demolition. Tenryu and Kitao beat Demolition, which is weird. I really want to know what the context was there. Anyway, Koji Kitao was also a sumo wrestler. And he was a higher ranked sumo wrestler, having achieved Yokozuna status, than John Tenta, and felt that he should not have to put over John Tenta. But the interesting thing here is that Koji Kitao is a straight up asshole. He is asshole. Like, he should be the center of the dark side of the ring, okay? This is a guy, and I fell into a hole of looking at Koji Kitao factoids. So he got fired from New Japan because he was saying racist things about Riki Choshu. Now, Riki Choshu was Korean, and apparently he decided he was going to offend Riki Choshu and got fired from New Japan. So then he said he was going to he was not going to put over John Tenta because he was a higher ranked sumo than John Tenta, and he was going to start a shoot fight with John Tenta. And it didn't go that well for him. He didn't actually kick John Tenta's ass or anything like that, but he got himself disqualified. But he threw a tantrum outside the ring and then grabbed the microphone after the match and told the entire of Japan that wrestling was fake, which they already knew, because I believe Tiger Mask, Satoru Sayama, had already come out and said that wrestling was fake. I think he did that in like the early 80s. He had already come out, and they didn't care. It's Japan. They don't give a fuck. As long as, the show is presented as a sport, they will buy into it. Just like, in the United States, they don't care. Nobody cares that wrestling is not real. Anyways, considering now that he thinks that he's hot shit because he tried to get into a fight with Earthquake and that he wanted to do real fighting, he decides to join UWFI, which is a half-worked, half-shoot wrestling promotion. It's a whole thing. It's one of those things in Japan where there's like 100 of these promotions. They all claim that they're real, fighting for real, and we're going to do real martial arts, but in reality, it's a work. UWFI is one of those. And he really starts a fight with Nobuhiko Takada and got himself knocked out legit in one of those fights, and that was pretty fun. He ended up doing MMA for a while before ultimately retiring. He died in 2019. I believe they say he died of kidney failure or something like that. That Koji Kitao was a very interesting guy. He's an interesting sumbitch. I can tell you that much. He's funny. He's a funny guy. Anyway, they of course talked about John Tenta being Earthquake. How Vince saw him, I believe, in All Japan, and called him over to work with Hulk Hogan. And he had a short run with Hogan. They talked a little bit about him crushing Damien, which they actually exposed that there was pantyhose and hamburger meat in that bag. Not really a snake, but then again, you could have guessed he wasn't going to sit on a real snake. But I did enjoy Jake Roberts, talking about that it was his idea to be tied up in the ropes and forced to watch the torture of, the crushed snake. And it didn't really occur to me, because I wasn't paying that close attention to it, that when they did the Quake burgers later, that it was the same thing with the Big Boss Man and Al Snow Dog's Pepper. When Big Boss Man killed Al Snow's dog and fed it to him, this was the same thing. He crushed the snake and fed it to the cast. Bobby Heenan and Vince McMahon. They're eating snake burgers. Crushed Damien. It's tremendous. It tickled the hell out of me once I really put two and two together. They touched on the Natural Disasters, his tag team with Fred Ottman, them winning the tag team championships. Then we went into the usual biography stuff about how wrestling is so terrible on the family because you got to travel so much, blah, 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 blah. I get it, right? We already understand how that works. So after the Natural Disasters disband, John Tenta goes to Japan. Ottman continues in WWF. And so 1993, he goes to WCW, he being John Tenta, where he's made Avalanche. And he's, but it's too close to Earthquake, so he's got to change the gimmick, and they change it to Shark. That was awful. That was just so bad. Shark was so bad. They didn't mention Hulk Hogan, which I thought Hulk Hogan was the reason why he ended up getting a job in WCW, because Hogan liked working with them. That seemed to be something I remember reading somewhere, but I didn't take notes on that, so don't take my word for it. But in any event, the Shark was absolutely terrible. It's a stupid gimmick. It's just dumb. Later on in his WCW run, he of course freed himself from that. referring to himself as, I'm a man. I'm not a shark. I'm not an avalanche. Okay, that's boring. That's boring. I'm just regular old John Tenta. Like, okay, that sucks. They took some time to talk about Shockmaster, which is Fred Ottman in the mask and him barreling through the wall. It's funny because Ottman is a part of the Earthquake story, but I didn't think I really needed that here. But then again, when are you ever going to talk about Fred Ottman? Almost never, right? So he returned to the WWF in 1998. Now, this is where I want to kind of expand on the story a little bit more. Now, Golga of the Oddities. Jake Roberts says that he felt that they were humiliating John Tenta by making him Golga of the Oddities. Now, John Tenta himself, in an interview with Slam Wrestling back in 2000, he says that he was not comfortable with Golga until he turned babyface. And that's when he actually began to like it, because Golga as a character made him a fan of South Park. But more importantly, he said that the Oddities he felt were, quote, good, clean entertainment and not so much into sexuality. Meaning that, and him and Fred Ottman both had the same mentality. Fred Ottman talked about it in a 1998 interview with Slam Wrestling, that, and this guy was running a strip club at the time, by the way, but he liked the more child-friendly WWF. These were the two guys who, you know, and they talked about this in the biography, or the Dark Side of the Ring, that these were not two guys who went out and partied and, you know, got drunk and got into issues. They basically sat in the hotel room, talked, and ate. That was pretty much it. And both of these guys were like, hey, I didn't mind being Tugboat. Tugboat was fun for the kids. I got into this business to make people happy or whatever. And Earthquake had the same idea. Like, the Golga was fun. You know, Golga was fine. He said eventually they were supposed to be working towards removing the mask, but it actually never happened. But in 2000, at this point in time, when he's being interviewed by Greg Oliver, he's down on his luck. He's like really bad off. His contract has been canceled, and they talked about that here in the Dark Side of the Ring. That once his contract got canceled from WWE, he basically lost everything. He started having to file for bankruptcy and all this kind of stuff. He had no steady work, and in 2000, he's telling Sean Oliver that he was talking with Vince about maybe making a return. And until Vince, you know, gets back to him, he's going to talk to WCW, because again, it still existed at this point. He even said that there was conversations between him and Paul Heyman for him to join ECW, but nothing ever materialized. And then he started saying that he can't go work in Japan either, because when he was working in WWF, he worked for Tenryu, and Tenryu had heat with Baba. And now all Japan is making excuses like, we don't have enough room for you. And Baba had just died at this point. So it's 2000. Baba died in 99. So, but he's, you know, being told that we're not bringing in that many foreigners this year. So we don't have any room. This guy was 36 in 2000. And he can't find a job anywhere. He said he tried to go to New Japan, but New Japan has a partnership with WCW, and they really only using WCW guys. So he was basically working in Canadian indies. And this sucks. You know, that sucked. It sucked to read that. You know, I'm not the biggest Earthquake fan in the world, but Jesus Christ, you would think that they would be able to have something for the guy to do. But no, they didn't have anything. So this is how he ended up working in retail. He's working in malls and this kind of stuff. And then out of nowhere, he, of course, starts to develop blood clots. And we find out he has bladder cancer. And this is what ultimately takes his life. He was only 42 years old. But generally speaking, it's a straightforward story. There's not much dark about it except the fact that he died very young. Even when it comes to the cancer part, he's still living his life. He's doing karaoke with his wife. He's, you know, sitting at the edge of the bed and he's watching tapes of himself on WWF television, laughing and having fun. You know, everybody has good, clean memories of him. There's no abuse. There's no violence. There's no drugs. There's nothing, you know? So there was no darkness to this dark side of the ring. It was, hey, this guy was one of the guys who was probably too good for the business because he was a genuine, nice guy who most everybody who met him liked him, who fell on hard times. And, you know, he maybe didn't take care of himself when it comes to the cancer thing because he didn't tell anybody about it initially and ended up dying. You know, it sucks. What really sucked is, you know, his wife said that no wrestlers came to his funeral and that no one reached out to them when he died. That sucks too, because and there's interviews of, you know, Fred Ottman saying that, you know, this is his brother from another mother and all this kind of stuff, and that he loves him and he misses him and all that. Apparently he didn't even go to the funeral. His wife didn't say he went to the funeral. I didn't see Fred Ottman say he was going to the funeral. So it's sad. And I know, you know, sometimes people can't do funerals. I mean, it is what it is. But as a documentary of John Tenta, I think it was mediocre. They should have spent more time talking about his amateur wrestling career at that point, where, you know, he wrestled in high school. He also wrestled in college, you know, so it would have been nice to do a proper biography if we were going to do this instead of doing this, this kind of format. I don't think the Dark Side of the Ring format is good for general biographies. So a lot of people are going to probably sleep on this episode and say you didn't get anything out of it. There was nothing salacious in it. So I get it, but learning a little bit more about, you know, often forgotten main event guys like Earthquake, you know, before he went to WCW anyway, can be pretty fun. You know, it can be pretty interesting in and of itself without all of the dirty stuff that typically is a part of these stories, is a lot of the salacious headline-y kind of stuff. We don't need that all the time. In fact, it can actually be a good thing that not all wrestlers are, you know, absolute drug addicts and scumbags. By all accounts, that's not what we see from John Tenta. It's a pretty straightforward story. And sometimes that's good too. So I'm of two minds on this, but mostly I think it's a mediocre episode of Dark Side of the Ring. Hopefully he gets a proper biography by WWE or something, or maybe somebody makes a proper documentary on his life that's not in this format, that spends so much time on like Shockmaster and, you know, Fred Ottman's, you know, brother-in-law getting killed, which, you know, again, when are you ever going to talk to Fred Ottman? But this is supposed to be about Tenta, you know. But let me know what you guys thought. I'm pretty sure most of you watched it. Like, share, subscribe. I'll talk to you guys later.
Old non-aggression. Once that lesson sets in, you'll see a session where you got an affection for no progression, regression. The